Chapter 1: The Eternal Mother. In the valley nestled between towering mountains, a tranquil village thrived along the banks of an ancient river. Known as Elaris, meaning the Eternal Mother, the river was the lifeblood of the villagers. Its waters sparkled under the sun, providing fish to eat, water to drink, and nourishment for their crops. The villagers revered it not just as a resource, but as a guardian spirit watching over them. Elaris was more than just a river to these people. Its origins were woven into the myths of the valley. Elders would recount tales of how Elaris was born from the tears of the mountains, weeping for the first humans who struggled to find sustenance. They believed the river's flowing waters carried whispers of those early days, reminding the villagers of their bond with the land and each other. Rituals were held at its banks during every full moon, where offerings of fruit, flowers, and grain were set afloat to honor the Eternal Mother. Lira, a young girl with a heart full of wonder, was unlike the other villagers. While others saw the river as a means to sustain their lives, Lira saw it as a friend and a teacher. She would spend hours sitting by its banks, listening to the melodies of its currents and watching the sunlight dance across its surface. To her, Elaris spoke in whispers, not in words but in ripples, revealing secrets of harmony and life. Lira's connection to the river was special, even among those who revered it. She felt the pulse of its currents and could sense when the waters were calm, joyous, or troubled. Her days were filled with curiosity and exploration. She would trace the river's course, discovering hidden coves and quiet pools where fish darted and dragonflies hovered. Sometimes, she thought she could hear songs carried in the breeze, as if the river was trying to communicate its eternal wisdom. One fateful morning, as Lira sat by the river, she noticed something unusual. The current seemed weaker, and the water level had dropped. The vibrant fish she always saw were scarce, and the reeds along the edges looked dry. Troubled, she ran back to the village to warn the elders. Soon, dark clouds of fear gathered over the valley as the villagers realized the river was receding. The news spread like wildfire. Farmers looked at their wilting crops with dread, and the village children, who often played by the river, stared at its shrinking banks in confusion. The elders convened an urgent meeting, their voices filled with worry and disbelief. How could Elaris, their eternal guardian, falter? They resolved to hold a grand ritual, believing that their prayers and offerings would restore the river's strength. But as the days passed, the river's flow continued to weaken. Lira couldn't shake the feeling that the river was trying to tell her something. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting golden hues across the water, she knelt by its edge. "Elaris," she whispered, "what is happening to you? Please, show me how I can help." And then, for the first time, the river responded. In the valley nestled between towering mountains, a tranquil village thrived along the banks of an ancient river. Known as Elaris, meaning the Eternal Mother, the river was the lifeblood of the villagers. Its waters sparkled under the sun, providing fish to eat, water to drink, and nourishment for their crops. The villagers revered it not just as a resource, but as a guardian spirit watching over them. Lira, a young girl with a heart full of wonder, was unlike the other villagers. While others saw the river as a means to sustain their lives, Lira saw it as a friend and a teacher. She would spend hours sitting by its banks, listening to the melodies of its currents and watching the sunlight dance across its surface. To her, Elaris spoke in whispers, not in words but in ripples, revealing secrets of harmony and life. One fateful morning, As Lira sat by the river, she noticed something unusual. The current seemed weaker, and the water level had dropped. Troubled, she ran back to the village to warn the elders. Soon, dark clouds of fear gathered over the valley as the villagers realized the river was receding. Chapter 2: The Drought's Shadow. The skies turned merciless, withholding their gift of rain as if nature itself had abandoned the valley. The once majestic Elaris, the lifeblood of the village, shrank into a shallow, lifeless trickle. Its banks, once lush with reeds and teeming with wildlife, now lay cracked and barren under the relentless sun. Crops wilted in the fields, their golden promise of sustenance reduced to brittle stalks. Wells that had never run dry before became empty pits of despair, and the air grew heavy with the scent of dust and decay. In the village, fear hung like a shroud. The elders, who had always been the guiding light in times of trouble, appeared helpless. They gathered by the dwindling river, their weathered hands trembling as they performed ancient rituals. Offerings of grain, fruit, and flowers were set afloat, though there was hardly enough to spare. With chants and prayers, they begged Elaris to restore her flow and protect her people. Yet, the river remained silent. For Lira, the silence was unbearable. She had always felt a connection to the river, a bond deeper than words. To her, Elaris was not just a source of life but a living presence, a guardian who whispered secrets through ripples and currents. As the river grew weaker, so too did Lira's sense of balance, as if a vital part of her soul was fading. Determined to understand what was happening, Lira spent her days by the riverbank, her small figure a lone sentinel against the growing shadow of despair. She watched as fish floundered in the shallows, their silvery bodies reflecting the harsh sunlight. Birds that once sang from the nearby trees had fallen silent, their nests abandoned. The sight filled her with sorrow, but also with resolve. "Elaris," she whispered one evening, her voice breaking, "I have listened to your stories and felt your strength. Tell me what to do, and I will do it." As if in response, the water stirred. It was a faint ripple, yet it carried a weight that stilled Lira's breath. Then, to her astonishment, a voice emerged. It was soft but ancient, like the rustling of leaves in a forgotten forest. "Child of the valley," the river said, "I have not abandoned you. My strength is taken, my flow blocked by those who exploit without care. If you wish to restore me, you must journey to the mountains. There, the truth awaits." When Lira shared the river's words with the villagers, she was met with skepticism and fear. The elders, once steadfast in their wisdom, looked at her with doubt. "A child cannot undertake such a journey," one said, shaking his head. "The mountains are dangerous, and the river's voice may be but a trick of desperation." But Lira's resolve was unshakable. She stood before the gathered villagers, her voice steady and her eyes alight with determination. "If the river believes I can do it, then I must try. Elaris has given us everything. It is time for us to give back." Though most doubted her, a few offered their support. Her mother, tears streaming down her face, packed a small satchel with dried fruit and a flask of the last clean water. An elder pressed a simple wooden charm into her hand, carved with the symbol of Elaris. "For protection," he murmured. Others could only watch as the girl they had known all her life stepped onto the path toward the mountains, her figure small against the vastness of the valley. As Lira walked away, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Behind her, the villagers stood in silence, their hope flickering like a fragile candle in the wind. Ahead, the mountains loomed, their peaks shrouded in mist and mystery. Lyra's heart was heavy with the weight of the task, but she held fast to the river's words. Somewhere in those peaks lay the truth, and she would find it, for Elaris, for her people, and for the valley she called home. Chapter 3: The Mountain Secret. The journey was arduous, stretching across days that tested Lyra's endurance and courage. The path to the mountains was fraught with challenges. Jagged rocks threatened to shred her sandals, and the steep cliffs loomed like silent sentinels daring her to falter. The winds howled with a biting chill, carrying with them the eerie cries of distant creatures. Yet, Lira pressed on, her heart fortified by the river's plea and the desperate faces of her people. As she climbed higher, the landscape grew increasingly barren. Dried-up streams, their beds etched like scars into the earth, whispered tales of the water that once flowed freely. Trees stood skeletal, their branches reaching skyward as if pleading for mercy. Animals, gaunt and disoriented, roamed aimlessly in search of sustenance. Lira paused to offer what little she had, a few drops of water from her flask, to a trembling fawn she encountered. Its wide, sorrowful eyes mirrored the plight of the valley, strengthening her resolve to continue. The nights were no less unforgiving. Beneath a canopy of stars, Lira would huddle under her thin cloak, the cold seeping into her bones. Sleep was fleeting, haunted by dreams of her village wilting away and the river's voice growing ever fainter. Yet, even in her moments of despair, she found solace in the memories of Elaris' teachings. The river had always spoken of resilience, of finding strength even in the face of adversity. Those lessons became her guiding light. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lira reached the source of Elaris. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs and filled her heart with both sorrow and fury. Before her stood a massive dam, an imposing wall of stone and iron, blocking the river's flow. Behind it, the waters churned restlessly, trapped and unable to reach the valley below. Around the dam, strangers clad in iron armor moved with purpose, their laughter and shouted orders grating against the silence of the mountains. These strangers were unlike anyone Lira had ever seen. Their faces were hard, their eyes devoid of empathy, and their hands stained with the marks of industry. Machines groaned and clanked as they diverted the river's water into vast reservoirs and pipelines. To them, the river was not a guardian or a lifeblood, it was a commodity to be exploited. Lira approached the strangers, her small frame dwarfed by their imposing presence. Summoning all her courage, she stepped forward and called out, her voice clear and steady despite her fear. "Please," she implored, "release the river. My people are dying, and the valley is withering. Elaris has always been a gift for all who depend on her. You cannot take her away." The strangers turned to her, their expressions a mix of amusement and disdain. One of them, a tall man with a face as cold as the mountain air, sneered. "Why should we care for a dying valley?" he said. "This water serves us now. Your people are of no concern to us." Lyra's heart ached at their callousness, but she refused to give up. "The river is not yours to own," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and conviction. "She belongs to the land, to all who depend on her. If you continue this, you will destroy not just my home but the balance of life itself." Her words fell on deaf ears. The strangers laughed, dismissing her as a foolish child. One by one, they returned to their work, leaving Lira standing alone before the towering dam. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away. This was no time for despair. The river had called on her for a reason, and she would not fail. That night, as the moon cast its pale glow over the mountains, Lira sat by the dam's edge. The air was thick with tension, the river's trapped waters churning restlessly behind the barrier. Lira closed her eyes and placed her hands on the cold stone of the dam. "Elaris," she whispered, "Mother, guide me. Show me what to do." The river answered. Its voice was no longer the gentle murmur she had known, but a commanding roar, resonating with ancient power. "Courage and sacrifice, child," it said. "That is the price of life." Lyra's heart raced as the meaning of the river's words sank in. She knew what she had to do. The dam was formidable, but it was not invincible. Every structure had a weakness, and she would find it. Guided by the moonlight and the river's whispers, she examined the dam, her fingers tracing the lines of its construction. She noted the places where the stone was cracked, where the iron supports were beginning to corrode. These imperfections became her focus. Through the night, Lira worked tirelessly. With a makeshift chisel fashioned from a shard of rock, she struck at the dam's weakest points. Each blow sent vibrations through her arms, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. The stone was unyielding, but so was her determination. Her hands grew raw and blistered, her muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. As dawn broke, painting the mountains in hues of gold and crimson, the dam began to tremble. The strangers, roused by the sound of cracking stone, rushed to stop her. Their shouts echoed across the mountains, but Lira was undeterred. She climbed to the highest point of the dam, her heart pounding with both fear and resolve. With one final, mighty strike, she drove her chisel into the heart of the structure. The dam gave way with a deafening roar. The trapped waters surged forth in a tidal wave of power, reclaiming their natural course. The strangers scattered, their machines swept away by the force of the flood. Lira, too, was caught in the torrent, her small body carried down the mountainside by the rushing river. When the waters finally calmed, Lira lay on the riverbank, her body bruised and battered but alive. The river's voice, now a gentle lullaby, whispered its gratitude. "You have restored the balance, child. You have saved us all." Chapter 4: The Courage of a Child. Lira understood the enormity of the task before her. The dam stood as an immovable wall against the life-giving flow of Elaris, and its presence felt like a violation of everything the river had ever meant to her and her people. As the first light of dawn crept over the jagged peaks, Lira crouched in the shadow of the dam, her fingers tracing the cold, unyielding surface of the stone. Her heart thudded in her chest, not with fear, but with a fierce determination born of desperation and love. In the quiet hours of the night before, she had studied the structure intently, her sharp eyes noting every crack and weakness. The dam's construction was precise, but time and the elements had not been kind. Small fissures had formed where the stone met the iron supports, and it was there that Lira resolved to focus her efforts. Armed only with a makeshift tool, a jagged piece of rock she had shaped into a crude chisel, she climbed to the highest point of the dam. Every step was deliberate, her bare feet finding purchase on the uneven surface, her fingers gripping the stone with a strength that belied her small frame. The world was still as she began her work. Her first strike echoed sharply, the sound carrying across the mountains like a call to action. The vibrations jarred her arms, but she gritted her teeth and struck again. Each blow was a prayer, each strike a promise to the river and to her people. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with the dirt and tears that streaked her skin, but she did not falter. As the sun rose higher, her efforts drew the attention of the strangers who had built the dam. They emerged from their encampment, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief as they saw the small figure perched high above, chipping away at their fortress. Shouts erupted, and a group of them began to climb toward her, their heavy boots clanging against the metal scaffolding. Lyra's heart pounded, but she refused to look back. She could hear their voices growing louder, their threats sharper, but her focus remained unbroken. She struck harder, faster, her every movement fueled by the urgency of the river's cries. The stone began to crumble beneath her relentless assault. A deep crack snaked its way through the dam, its jagged line a testament to Lyra's unwavering resolve. The strangers were closing in now, their outstretched hands nearly within reach. One of them shouted, "Stop, girl! You'll kill us all." But Lira only gripped her chisel tighter. She thought of the withering crops, the parched lips of the village children, and the river's once joyful song now silenced by greed. She struck one final, mighty blow. The dam shuddered violently, a deep groan reverberating through its structure. A moment of stillness hung in the air, and then, with a deafening roar, the dam gave way. Water exploded forth in a torrent of unstoppable power, tearing through the barriers and sweeping away everything in its path. The strangers screamed as they scrambled for safety, their machines and tools swallowed by the raging flood. Lira was caught in the surge, the icy water enveloping her and carrying her down the mountainside. She tumbled through the chaos, her body battered against rocks and debris, yet she felt no fear. The river held her, cradled her, its voice a triumphant roar that filled her heart with a strange, serene joy. She had done it. She had freed Elaris. When the floodwaters finally settled, the valley below was transformed. The river surged through its natural course once more, its waters glinting in the sunlight like a ribbon of life woven through the land. The villagers, drawn by the sound of rushing water, gathered at the riverbank. Their eyes widened in awe as they beheld the revitalized river, its flow strong and vibrant as it had once been. Amidst the jubilation, they spotted Lira. She lay motionless on the muddy bank, her clothes tattered and her small hands raw and blooded. Her mother was the first to reach her, falling to her knees and cradling her daughter's battered form. "Lira," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My brave girl." Slowly, Lira's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze was distant at first, but then she smiled, a small, weary smile that spoke of quiet triumph. "The river," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "She's free." The villagers lifted her gently, their voices a chorus of gratitude and wonder. They carried her back to the village, where she was tended to with the utmost care. The elders, who had once doubted her, bowed their heads in reverence. They understood now that it was not just courage but a deep bond with the spirit of Elaris that had guided Lira to achieve what they had thought impossible. As the days passed, the valley began to heal. The crops drank deeply of the restored waters, the animals returned to their grazing, and the laughter of children once again echoed along the riverbanks. Lira, though weakened by her ordeal, found strength in the sight of the thriving land. The river's song had returned, a melody of life and renewal that would forever remind the villagers of the courage of a child who had risked everything to save them all. Chapter 5: The River's Legacy. The river's return marked a new era for the valley, its waters flowing stronger than ever, nourishing the once parched land and renewing the bond between the people and their guardian spirit. For Lira, this triumph was bittersweet. Though the villagers celebrated her as a hero, she knew the cost of her journey had been great, not only for her but for the river itself, which had endured years of exploitation and neglect. In the weeks that followed, the valley underwent a remarkable transformation. Fields of golden grain swayed in the wind once again, and the orchards, once barren, burst into life with fruits of every hue. The wildlife returned, their songs filling the air, and the laughter of children playing by the river's edge was a joyful melody to all who heard it. Yet, amid the jubilation, Lira found herself drawn repeatedly to the river bank, her heart heavy with questions about the future. One evening, as the moon cast its silvery glow over the water, Lira sat alone by the river, her thoughts restless. "Elaris," she whispered, "you are free now, but for how long? Will others come to take what is not theirs? How can we protect you from harm again?" The river's voice rose softly from the current, its tone both reassuring and resolute. "Child of the valley," it said, "my strength lies not only in my waters, but in the hearts of those who cherish and protect me. Your journey has awakened the spirit of guardianship in your people. Teach them to respect and nurture the balance of life. My gift to you is not just water but wisdom. Share it, and I will endure." Moved by the river's words, Lira resolved to ensure that the lessons of her journey would never be forgotten. With the elders' blessing, she began to teach the villagers about sustainable ways to live in harmony with the land. She spoke of the importance of protecting Elaris, not out of fear of drought, but out of love and respect for the source of their life. Together, the villagers established traditions that honored the river's legacy, rituals of gratitude, practices of conservation, and a council dedicated to safeguarding the valley's natural harmony. Lira also recognized that the story of her journey carried a message that extended beyond the valley. She began to share her knowledge with neighboring villages, urging them to value their rivers and forests. Her message resonated, and soon, a network of communities emerged, united in their commitment to preserving the natural world. The story of Lira and Elaris spread far and wide, inspiring others to protect the lifelines of their lands. As the years passed, Lira grew into a woman of wisdom and strength. Her bond with Elaris remained unbroken, and many believed she could still hear the river's voice. The story of her journey became a legend, passed down from generation to generation, inspiring others to stand up for the balance of life and the protection of the natural world. One day, as Lira stood by the river with her own children, she reflected on how far they had come. The valley was no longer just a place of survival but a beacon of harmony and resilience. She knew the work was never truly done, but as she watched her children wade into the water, their laughter mingling with the river's gentle song, she felt a deep sense of peace. And so, the valley flourished, its people and the river united in a bond of mutual care. The story of Lira and the Eternal Mother became more than a tale of courage, it became a reminder that true strength lies in love, sacrifice, and the unyielding determination to protect what is precious. The river's song echoed through the valley, a timeless melody of life and renewal, flowing as endlessly as the waters of Elaris.